The war had already been lost. Everyone on the Velhari command station knew it, even if no one said it out loud. Lights in the operation center flickered every few minutes because the power grid had taken damage 3 days ago, and no one had the parts to fix it. Half the screens were dead, the other half showed things no one wanted to see. Enemy fleet markers spreading across the star map like a disease, red dots swallowing the blue one system by system. Ambassador Tyrell Voss stood at the back of the room and watched it happen. He was old by Valhari standards, his pale gray skin creased around the eyes and mouth, his tall frame slightly bent from decades of carrying weight that had nothing to do with gravity. He had served the cooperative for 40 years. He had brokered treaties, ended border disputes, and once talked a rogue colony out of civil war using nothing but patience and a bottle of fermented nectar. Diplomacy required two sides willing to talk, and the Kraxan Dominion did not talk, they consumed. The Kraxan had hit the outer colonies first. 3 systems fell in the first week, not conquered, not occupied, but harvested. The insectoid swarms descended on population centers, stripped them of organic material, and moved on. Entire cities reduced to empty shells. The Velhari fleet had responded with everything it had, and everything it had was not enough. The Kraxan warships were ugly, brutal things, massive hulls covered in organic plating that could regenerate mid-battle. They fought without fear because fear was not something their hive mind understood. They simply advanced, absorbed losses, and kept coming. Now 6 weeks into the invasion, the cooperative had lost 11 of its 17 member worlds. The combined fleet was down to fewer than 90 operational ships, most of them damaged. The Kraxan had over 600 capital vessels closing on the Velhari home world. There would be no miracle, there would be no last-minute rally. The math was clear, and math did not care about hope. Tyrell had spent 3 days trying to convince the Cooperative Council to send the signal. 3 days of arguments, shouting, and quiet desperation in back rooms that smelled like fear and stale air. The council members were terrified, not of the Kraxan, strangely enough, but of the alternative, because the signal Tyrell wanted to send would go to the soul exclusion zone, and the soul exclusion zone meant humans. No one in the galactic community dealt with humans willingly. It was not hatred, it was something deeper and more honest than hatred. It was the gut level discomfort that every species felt when confronted with something that should not exist. Earth was a death world. Its gravity was punishing. Its atmosphere was a corrosive mix that would burn the lungs of most galactic species within minutes. Its surface was covered in saltwater oceans that generated storms powerful enough to flatten cities, tectonic plates that shook the ground without warning, and an ecosystem so aggressively competitive that even the plants had evolved to kill, and somehow, against every reasonable expectation, sentient species had clawed its way to the top of that nightmare and built starships. Humans were stronger than they should be, faster than they should be. They healed from injuries that would kill other species. They could function without sleep for days, eat foods that were literally toxic to half the galaxy, and survive in temperature ranges that span from frozen wastelands to boiling deserts. Their endurance was obscene. Their pain tolerance was worse. And they bred fast, terrifyingly fast. By galactic standards, the galaxy had decided collectively and without much debate that the best policy was to leave humans alone and hope they returned. The Sol exclusion zone was an unofficial but universally respected boundary. You did not go in, you did not invite them out. Tyrell wanted to invite them out. The council's objections were predictable. Councillor Shen, who represented the Palori species, said that bringing humans into the war was like setting fire to your house to kill the insects inside it. Councillor Dree of the Morvani said that even if the humans came, there was no guarantee they would help. They might simply take the opportunity to expand their own territory. Councillor Vale, the youngest member and the only one who still seemed to believe in things, asked quietly what made Tyrell think the humans would respond at all. Tyrell answered each objection with the same patience he had used throughout his career, even though his hands were shaking under the table. To Shen, he said that the house was already on fire. The Kraxen would reach Athos in weeks, and there would be nothing left to burn. To Dree, he said that human territorial expansion was a problem for the future, and the future required being alive to see it. To Vale, he told a partial truth. He said that humans had a documented pattern of responding to distress signals because their culture placed value on something they called not standing by. What Tyrell did not tell the council was what he had read in the classified files, the one sealed after the Frin conflicts 30 years ago, when a human expeditionary force had intervened in a minor border war on the edge of explored space. The official report said the humans had sent a small task force and resolved the situation. The classified files told a different story. The humans had not resolved the situation, they had ended it completely. In less than a standard day, the species that had started the conflict no longer had a functioning military. Some analysts believed they no longer had a functioning government. Tyrell had read those files 4 times. He understood exactly what he was asking for. He also understood that it was the only option left. The council voted. It was not unanimous. Shen and 2 others abstained, but it passed. The beacon was authorized. The signal was simple. It contained the cooperative's identification codes, a summary of the Kraxen invasion fleet positions, civilian casualty estimates, and a request for humanitarian assistance. Tyrell wrote that last part himself, choosing the words carefully. Humanitarian assistance, aid, relief. Soft words designed to make the request feel small and manageable, like asking a neighbor for a cup of water. The signal fired into the void, aimed at the Sol exclusion zone, and Tyrell stood at the viewport watching the stars as if he could see it traveling somewhere behind him. A technician whispered to a colleague that it probably would not matter anyway. The humans would send a few medical ships at best, maybe some food supplies. It was better than nothing. He just kept watching the stars and trying not to think about what he had actually done. 8 hours later, and several light years away, the signal reached the communications array of the carrier Yui in Blackwater, where Admiral Nate Calloway was halfway through a cup of coffee and a report on supply chain logistics. He read the decoded message once, sat down his coffee, and picked up the direct line to Earth. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. The response from the Joint Defense Directorate was 2 words long: send everything Admiral Nate Calloway had not slept in 31 hours and did not plan to sleep for another 20. He stood in the war room of the UEN, Blackwater, hands flat on the edge of the holographic table, staring at the blue light of the tactical display as it populated with data, ship names, crew rosters, fuel reserves, ammunition counts, maintenance status reports, all of it streaming in from across a network of installations that officially did not exist. The galactic community believed that humanity operated a defense fleet of roughly 200 ships. This number appeared in every intelligence assessment published by the major alien powers. It was based on observed patrol routes, docking records at known human stations, and the occasional diplomatic exchange where human officials casually confirmed the figure with a shrug and a smile. 200 ships, enough to defend the Sol system and a handful of nearby colonies, nothing to worry about. Actual number was closer to 2,000 years ago when humanity first made contact with the wider galaxy and realized how thoroughly it was feared. The United Earth government made a decision that would shape everything that followed. They would not try to convince the galaxy that humans were harmless. They would not waste time on charm offensives or cultural exchange programs. Instead, they would smile, nod, accept the exclusion zone, and use the privacy it provided to build the largest and most advanced military fleet any Deathworld species had ever assembled. They hollowed out asteroids in the deep belt and turned them into shipyards. They constructed orbital factories hidden inside gas giant atmospheres where no alien sensor could reach. They recruited, trained, and maintained a standing navy of over 600,000 personnel, all operating under classification levels so high that most human civilians did not know the full scope of what their species had built. The 7th Expeditionary Strike Group was the sharpest edge of that hidden blade. 412 warships organized into battle groups designed for rapid deployment into hostile territory. They were called the Reapers, and their nickname was not ironic. Calloway had commanded the 7th for 3 years. He was a tall man with a weathered face and close-cropped gray hair, and he carried himself with the steady calm of someone who had already made peace with the worst possible outcomes. He had fought in 2 border skirmishes and a pirate suppression campaign that the public had never heard about. He knew what his ships could do. More importantly, he knew what his people could do. Captain Laura Pewitt arrived in the war room 12 minutes after the general alert sounded. She was in her mid-40s, lean and sharp-featured, with dark hair pulled back tight and eyes that missed nothing. Pewitt commanded the dreadnought UEN Grey Monday, the largest warship in the 7th and one of the most powerful vessels humanity had ever built. It was over 2 km long, armored with layered composite plating that could absorb hits that would vaporize smaller ships and carried enough firepower to crack a small moon. Pewitt loved that ship the way some people difficult dogs, with patience, respect, and a clear understanding of what it could do if you let it off the leash. She studied the tactical display without speaking for a full minute, then looked at Calloway. How bad? 600 cracks in capital ships around their home world, civilian population in the billions, local fleet is down to about 90 ships, most of them held together with hope and welding torches. Calloway tapped the display, zooming in on the AHS system. They sent A distress signal asking for humanitarian assistance. Pewett's mouth twitched. And we are sending humanitarian assistance. We are sending the most humanitarian assistance this galaxy has ever seen. Commander Greg Harland arrived next, slightly out of breath, carrying a data tablet loaded with intercepted cracks in communications. Harlan was the fleet intelligence chief, a quiet man with thinning brown hair and the kind of face that people forgot immediately after meeting him, which was useful in his line of work. He had spent the last 2 hours pulling apart the cracks in communication protocols that human signals intelligence had been quietly mapping for years. There, encryption is a joke, Harlan said, setting the tablet on the table. Mind species, they evolved to communicate biologically over short distances, so their electronic communication security is about 30 years behind ours. I can crack their command network in real time once we are in range. Calloway nodded. How long to get full penetration? Minutes. Their network is centralized. Everything routes through their command ship, what they call the overmind vessel. Knock out that node or better yet feed it garbage, and 600 ships lose the ability to coordinate. They will still fight, but they will fight stupid. Good. Start building the attack package. While Calloway and his senior staff planned, the fleet assembled. It was a sight that no alien species had ever witnessed, and that very few humans had seen in full. Ships emerged from hidden berths inside asteroids, slipping out of concealed docking bays like predators. Leaving their dens, destroyers came first, fast angular ships built for speed and violence, their hulls painted in the flat dark gray that gave them the look of deep water sharks. Then they cruisers bristling with weapon arrays and electronic warfare suites. Then the carriers, each one a floating city, packed with thousands of autonomous drone platforms waiting to be unleashed. And finally the dreadnoughts, massive and slow and terrible, their silhouettes blocking out the stars as they moved into formation. Lieutenant Katie Marsh watched the assembly from the bridge of the destroyer UEN Copperhead. She was 26 years old, with red hair tied in a short ponytail and freckles that she had never managed to outgrow. She had joined the Navy 4 years ago because she wanted to see what was beyond Sol, and in those 4 years she had seen exactly 3 patrol routes and a supply depot. She had never fired a weapon in combat. She had never seen an alien in person. She had trained for war the way all of them had, endlessly, rigorously, and with the quiet understanding that the training might never be needed. Now she stood on the bridge and watched 400 warships fall into formation around her, and the training felt very thin. Her commanding officer, Commander Phil Dunn, was a stocky man with a calm voice who had been running drills on the Copperhead for 6 years. He stepped up beside her and looked out at the fleet. First time seeing the full group, he asked. Yes, sir. Scary, right? Little, sir. Dunn smiled slightly. Good. Means you're paying attention. He checked his watch. Transit in 40 minutes. Get your station locked down. Marsh moved to her console and began running system checks around her. The crew of the Copperhead did the same. Quiet, focused, professional. No one was joking, no one was afraid, exactly, but there was a weight in the air that everyone could feel. They had trained for this, they had prepared for this, but preparation and reality were separated by a gap that could only be crossed one way. At waypoint Jericho, The fleet completed its formation, 412. Warships arranged in layered battle. Groups, each group assigned a specific role in the engagement plan that Callaway, Pewitt, and Harland had spent the last 14 hours refining. The plan was detailed, flexible, and built around a single core principle that Callaway had stated at the beginning of the planning session. We hit them so hard and so fast that they never recover. No pauses, no negotiations, no mercy for their fleet, total mercy for the civilians. That is the line, and we do not cross it in either direction. The fleet's drives powered up in sequence, each ship's reactor glowing brighter as it built toward transit threshold. From a distance it looked like a constellation coming to life, 400 points of light growing brighter in the darkness. Then all at once the lights stretched and vanished, and the fleet was gone. The Velhari had asked for bandages and blankets. What was coming through faster than light space toward them was something else entirely. 400 warships crewed by a species that had earned its place in the universe by surviving everything their own planet had thrown at them, and they were not coming to comfort anyone. They were coming to fight. The censor officer on the Velhari patrol frigate Gentle Dawn was the first to see them. His name was Corin, and he had been staring at the same empty stretch of space for 9 hours, half asleep in his chair when his console screamed at him with an alarm he had never heard before. He jerked upright, spilled his drink across the panel, and then froze as the display filled with contacts. Not 2, not 10, not 50. The number climbed past 100, past 200, past 300, and kept going. Each contact was tagged with an energy signature so powerful that the sensor system flagged it as a potential error. The computer assumed it was malfunctioning. Corin wished it was. He hit the emergency channel with a trembling hand. Command, this is Gentle Dawn. I have over 400 unidentified warships dropping out of faster than light transit at grid 77. They are in formation, tight formation. I have never seen energy readings like this. Please advise. There was a long silence on the channel. Then Gentle Dawn, repeat your contact. Count 400 plus, still counting. They are big. Command, some of these signatures are I do not even have a classification for them. On the Velhari command station orbiting Aves, the operation center went from quiet despair to full panic in the space of about 30 seconds. Officers scrambled to their stations, pulling up long-range sensor data that confirmed what the patrol frig had reported. A massive fleet had dropped into the system's outer approach lane, arranged in geometric formations so precise they looked computer-generated. The ships were broadcasting identification codes in a format the Velhari had only seen in old intelligence files. Human codes, Saul exclusion zone codes, Deathworlder codes. Counselor Shen was the first to speak, and what he said was not diplomatic. He turned to Tyrell Voss, who had been summoned to the command deck and was standing quietly by the viewport, and said, "What have you done to us?" Tyrell did not answer. Immediately, he was looking at the sensor display, watching the formation resolve into sharper detail as the human fleet moved inward. He could see the ship classifications now: destroyers in screening formations around larger cruisers, carriers at the center of each battle group, and at the heart of the fleet, 4 ships so massive they dwarfed everything around them. Dreadnoughts, he had read about them. Seeing them on a sensor display was something else entirely. I asked for help, Tyrell said finally. This is what they sent, this is not help, Shen hissed. This is an invasion. They will destroy the Kraxen and then they will destroy us. You have handed our worlds to the Deathworlders on a plate. The Kraxen are going to destroy us anyway, Tyrell said, his voice steady even though his hearts were pounding. In 3 weeks, maybe less, every being on Ath will be harvested for biofuel. Our children will be processed in cracks and refineries. I chose a different future. You may not like it, but it is a future where we are alive to complain. Before Shen could respond, the communication system chimed, an incoming transmission, broad spectrum and clean. Galactic standard. Someone on the human side had taken the time to use the Velhari diplomatic frequency with perfect protocol. A voice came through, calm and measured, with the slightly heavy accent that humans carried when speaking. Galactic standard, Velhari. Cooperative command, this is Admiral Nate Calloway, United Earth Navy, commanding the 7th Expeditionary Strike Group. We received your distress signal and have deployed in response. We are here to help. I am requesting a tactical briefing on current enemy positions, fleet strength and civilian population centers that need protection. We are ready to begin operations immediately. The room went silent, not the panicked silence from before. Something different. Tyrell watched the faces of the council members and the military officers around the room and saw something he had not seen in weeks. It was not hope exactly, it was closer to shock, the kind of shock that comes when you have accepted that you are going to die and then someone kicks the door open. Admiral Calloway waited patiently on the other end of the channel. He was standing in the war room of the Blackwater, hands behind his back, watching the Velhari system map populate on his display. Beside him, Captain Pewitt was already analyzing the tactical situation, scrolling through the Velhari fleet disposition data that their sensors were picking up passively. 93 ships, Pewitt said quietly. Most of them are damaged. Their flagship is a converted cargo hauler. They have been fighting with scraps. Calloway nodded. Give them rear guard and evacuation assignments. Keep them away from the line. Understood. Commander Harlan appeared on the internal screen from the intelligence ship UEN Pale Horse, which had taken up position at the edge of the fleet formation. He looked pleased, which on Harlan meant his mouth was slightly less flat than usual. We are inside their network. Kraxen command. Traffic is fully compromised. I am seeing their entire fleet disposition in real time. 614 capital ships clustered around Athos in 3 defensive rings. Their overminded vessel is at the center. Calloway asked, can you blind them? I can do better than blind them. I can make them deaf, blind, and confused all at once. Their communication architecture is built around the overmind as a central relay. If I flood that relay with corrupted signal data, every ship in their fleet loses coordination simultaneously. They will not know what is happening. They will not know where we are. They will not know where each other are. How long can you sustain it? Long enough. Calloway turned back to the main display. The Kraxen fleet was a dense cluster of red markers around the pale blue sphere of Athos. 600 warships, crewed by a hive mind species that had conquered dozens of systems through Sheer biological aggression, they had. Numbers, they had experience. They had the defensive advantage of the shattered ring debris field surrounding the planet, and they had absolutely no idea what was coming on the Velhari command station. The tactical briefing was underway. Tyrell had managed to calm the council enough to cooperate, though Shen sat in the corner, radiating disapproval. The Velhari military commander, a tired officer named Rivan, was sharing everything they had: feet positions, damage reports, civilian evacuation status, intelligence on cracks and attack patterns. He spoke with the flat tone of someone who had been losing for so long that the act of sharing information felt pointless. Captain Pewitt listened to all of it on the other end of the channel and asked precise, specific questions. How fast could the Kraxan ships turn? What was the reload time on their primary weapons? Did the organic hull plating have weak points? Rivan answered each question, and slowly, without realizing it, began to sit up a little straighter. Someone was asking the right questions. Someone was actually planning to fight. Meanwhile, aboard the destroyer Copperhead, Lieutenant Katie Marsh was watching the Velhari civilian stations through the ship's external cameras. The stations were battered, scorched hull plating, emergency patches visible from a distance, entire sections dark from power failures, but the viewports were crowded. Thousands of Velhari faces pressed against the glass, staring out at the human fleet that filled their sky. Marsh zoomed in on one of the viewports. A Velhari woman was holding a small child, pointing at the ships. Child's eyes were wide. Marsh could not tell if the expression was wonder or terror, maybe both. Commander Dunn's voice came over the ship's intercom, calm and clear. All hands, this is the captain. We are going to battle stations in 6 hours. I want every system checked twice, every weapon loaded, every escape pod verified. We are going into a fight that matters, and I expect every one of you to perform the way you have trained. Dunn out. Marsh turned back to her console and began her checks. Her hands were steady. Her stomach was not 6 hours. Then the math would change. The Kraxan Overmind did not have a name in the way that individual beings had names. It was a central intelligence, a living node in a HiveMind network that connected 600 warships and millions of soldiers into a single thinking organism. It had led the Dominion's expansion for decades, consuming species after species with the mechanical efficiency of a biological process. It did not hate its prey. It did not enjoy the killing. It simply fed because feeding was what the Kraxan did, and nothing in the galaxy had ever given it a reason to reconsider. The Overmind was aware of the new fleet that had entered the system. Its sensor drones had detected the energy signatures hours ago, and it had classified them as a minor threat. Reinforcements called by the dying Velhari, probably some small allied species sending whatever ships they could spare. Desperate species called for help. Help arrived in insufficient numbers, and the Kraxan consumed them. 2. It was how things worked. It had always been how things worked. The Overmind positioned its fleet in the shattered ring, the remains of a natural planetary ring that had been broken apart by cracks in orbital bombardment. Weeks ago, the debris field was hundreds of kilometers deep, filled with spinning rocks ranging from the size of a fist to the size of a city. It was a natural fortress any attacking fleet would have to navigate that mess while the Kraken ships already positioned and anchored among the larger asteroids picked them apart. It was a good plan. It had worked against the Velhari 3 times. At 0 hour, Admiral Calloway gave a single order from the war room of the Blackwater. Execute. Commander Harland pressed a button on his console aboard the Pale Horse, and the galaxy's most advanced electronic warfare suite went to work. The attack was elegant in its simplicity. Harland's team had spent hours mapping every communication pathway in the Kraken network, identifying relay nodes, signal frequencies, encryption patterns, and the biological electronic interface that connected the Overmind to its fleet. Now, they poured corrupted data into that network like poison into a river. The effect was immediate. On 600 Kraken warships, communication systems erupted with noise, orders dissolved into static, targeting data scrambled, fleet coordination signals, which the hive mind relied on the way a body relies on its nervous system, turned to garbage. In the span of 90 seconds, the most powerful invasion fleet in the sector became 600 ships operating alone, each one cut off from the others and from the Overmind that gave them purpose. Overmind felt it like a physical wound, a sudden screaming silence where the voices of its fleet had been. It tried to reestablish contact, pushing its biological transmitters to maximum power, but Harland's team was already inside the system, blocking every attempt, feeding false signals back through the network. The Overmind was not just blinded, it was trapped inside its own head. Captain Laura Pewitt did not wait for the confusion to settle. The moment Harland confirmed signal disruption, she pushed the Grey Monday's engines to full power and led the main battle line straight into the shattered ring. Behind her, 200 warships followed in an arrowhead formation, cruisers on the flanks, destroyers screening ahead, the dreadnought at the tip like the point of a spear. Every tactical doctrine in the galaxy said you did not fly a fleet into a debris field. The rocks were too dense, the navigation was too complex. One wrong turn could put an asteroid through your hull. The Velhari had never attempted it. The Kraken assumed no one would. Human ships were built for environments that would kill anything else. Their hulls were layered with a blade of armor designed to shrug off micrometeorite impacts. Their navigation systems processed thousands of trajectory calculations per second, threading ships through gaps that other species would consider impossible. And the pilots, the human pilots, had reflexes honed by a gravity well that was twice what most galactic species could tolerate. Where alien captains saw a death trap, human captains saw terrain. The Grey Monday entered the debris field at combat speed and did not slow down. Rocks the size of buildings spun past the dreadnoughts' hull, some close enough that the point defense guns had to shatter them to clear the path. Pewitt stood at her command station, eyes locked on the tactical display, calling course corrections with a calm voice that never wavered. She had trained for this. Her crew had trained for this. The ship had been built for this. The Kraken outer defense ring did not see them coming until it was too late. The first Kraken warship to make visual contact with the Grey Monday had exactly 4 seconds to register what it was seeing before the dreadnoughts' primary batteries opened fire. The Kraken vessel, a heavy cruiser with organic armor plating 3 m thick, broke apart like a clay pot. Hit with a hammer, the shots punched through the regenerative hull as if it were not there. Then the rest of the human fleet emerged from the debris field behind Pewit, and the real killing began. The battle was not a contest. It was a slaughter conducted with surgical precision. The human warships moved through the cracks in formation in coordinated groups, each one targeting a specific section of the enemy fleet. Without communication, the cracks in ships could not coordinate their defense. Some tried to form up with nearby vessels, but without the Overmind's guidance, their movements were clumsy and reactive. They fired back. The Kraxen were still dangerous, still powerful, but they fired at enemies they could not properly track, using weapons that could not lock onto targets, moving with death world speed. The drone swarms made it worse. Calloway had held the carriers back during the initial push, waiting until Pewit's battle line had split the cracks in formation. Then he gave the order and the carriers opened their bays. Tens of thousands of autonomous combat drones poured into the debris field like a swarm of metal insects. Each drone was small, fast, and expendable. They carried single-use warheads and basic targeting intelligence, and they flooded the spaces between the asteroids in numbers that overwhelmed any defense. The cracks and ships, already isolated and confused, now faced enemies coming from every direction. Drones slammed into their hulls in clusters, punching through organic armor at weak points that Harlan's intelligence had identified from captured data. Larger cracks in vessels could absorb the hits, but even they began to falter as the cumulative damage mounted. Smaller ships simply came apart. Lieutenant Katie Marsh fought her part of the battle in the tight spaces at the formation's edge. The Copperhead was assigned to a hunter group. 4 destroyers tasked with running down cracks and escorts that tried to flee. The main engagement, it was close range, fast and violent. The debris field meant that every engagement happened at distances so short that Marsh could see the enemy ships through the viewport with her own eyes. The first Kraxen ship they killed was a frigate that came spinning out of the rocks directly in front of them. Commander Dunn ordered weapons free, and the Copperhead's guns turned it into a cloud of fragments in less than 3 seconds. Marsh watched it happen and felt nothing. The training had taken over, and her hands moved across her console with a speed and steadiness that surprised her. The second ship was harder, a Kraxen destroyer bigger than the Copperhead that came at them from below and scored a direct hit on their section before their point defense could respond. The ship shook, alarms screamed, damage reports flooded in, hull breach on deck. 7, 2 crew members dead, engine output reduced. Dunn did not hesitate. He turned the Copperhead into the attack, closed the distance to point blank range, and put 6 shots into the Kraxen destroyer's engine section. The enemy ship went dark and spun away into the rocks. 2 crew members dead. Marsh had known them. She did not have time to think about it. The next target was already on her screen. The battle lasted 11 hours, 11 hours of constant fighting in a debris field that was dark, chaotic, and merciless. By the end, over 400 Kraxen warships had been destroyed or disabled. The shattered ring was a graveyard, alien wreckage and broken rocks spinning together in a cloud of debris that stretched across thousands of kilometers. The human fleet had lost 31 ships. Every loss was a wound, Every name would be remembered, but 31 against 400 was a ratio that no species in the galaxy had ever achieved, and the Kraxan dominions. Invasion was over, the Overminds. Command vessel was captured intact. Harlan's boarding teams, wearing heavy assault armor and carrying weapons designed for close combat in zero gravity, breached the vessel and secured it in under an hour. The Overmind itself was still alive. A massive biological mass of a ship's core, pulsing weakly, cut off from every mind it had ever commanded. Harlan's team did not kill it, they had orders to take it alive. Intelligence was more valuable than revenge. On the Velhari command station, the officers and council members watched the battle's aftermath in silence. The sensor displays showed the human fleet moving through the wreckage, systematically checking for survivors and securing disabled enemy vessels. It was efficient and thorough and absolutely terrifying. Ambassador Tyrell Voss sat in his chair and watched and said nothing. He had known this would happen. He had asked for it, and now that it was done, he felt something he had not expected, not relief, not triumph, but a deep and quiet fear of what came next. The gun stopped, and the quiet that followed was almost harder to bear. For weeks the Velhari had lived with the constant drumbeat of war, alarms, explosions, damage reports, the low hum of shields straining against bombardment. Now there was nothing. The cracks in fleet was wreckage, the debris field was still, and the human ships that had done the killing were still there. 400 dark shapes hanging in the void like something out of a nightmare that had decided to stay. The Velhari waited for what came next. They had seen enough of the galaxy to know how this usually worked. A powerful fleet destroys your enemy, and then it turns to look at you, and the price of salvation becomes clear: territory, resources, submission. The strong did not help the weak out of kindness. They helped because they wanted something, and the something was always the same. Admiral Nate Cal gave his next order 12 hours after the battle ended. It was not what anyone expected. Begin humanitarian operations. All carrier groups launch supply shuttles to civilian population centers. Engineering teams to the orbital stations. I want power and life support restored within 48 hours. Medical ships move to the inner system. Coordinate with Velhari authorities for triage priorities, and someone find me a list of their refugee camps, because those people need food before they need anything else. The fleet that had just killed 400 warships changed shape. Carriers that had launched drone swarms now launched cargo shuttles loaded with medical supplies, water purification equipment, and emergency rations. Destroyers that had hunted cracks and escorts now ran patrol routes along civilian shipping lanes, clearing debris and scanning for unexploded ordnance. Engineering crews in heavy work suits descended on battered Velhari stations and began welding hull breaches, replacing blown power conduits, and doing the slow, unglamorous work of putting things back together. Captain Laura Pewitt oversaw fleet repairs from the bridge of the Grey Monday. Her ship had taken hits during the push through the debris field, scoring along the port. Armor, a cracked sensor array, minor hull damage on 3 decks. Nothing critical, but enough to keep her repair crews busy. She split her attention between damage reports and the after-action assessment that she was compiling for Callaway. The numbers were Clean but not painless, 31 ships lost. 847 crew members killed, another 2,000 wounded, some critically, Pewitt wrote. Each figure down carefully because figures like these deserved care. She noted that the drone deployment had been held back longer than optimal. Callaway's decision to wait until the formation was split had been tactically sound, but it had cost the fleet 9 additional ships that might have survived if the swarms had launched earlier. She did not judge the call. She recorded it. Judgment was for after-action reviews, not for field reports written while there was still work to do. Commander Greg Harland was buried in data. The captured overmined vessel contained navigational charts, fleet disposition records, communication logs, and biological research files that painted a picture far larger and far darker than anyone had anticipated. The Craxan Dominion was not a single invasion force, it was an empire spanning dozens of star systems built on the subjugation and harvesting of at least 15 other species. Some of those species were still alive in Craxan controlled territory, used as labor or kept as biological reserves. The scale of suffering was staggering. Harlan transmitted his preliminary findings back to Earth through an encrypted burst. The response from the Joint Defense Directorate was brief and telling. Continue intelligence assessment. Prepare operational planning for extended deployment. The war was not over. The Battle of the Shattered Ring had been the opening move in something much larger, and Earth was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Lieutenant Katie Marsh was reassigned to ground relief on Afuz 2 days after the battle. She had not slept properly since before the engagement, and the shuttle ride down to the planet's surface was the first time she had sat still long enough to feel how tired she was. The Copperhead had survived, but it was scarred. The whole breach on Deck 7 had been patched but not fully repaired, and the 2 crew members who had died there, Petty Officer Sam Novick and Ensign Reed Vega, had been given a brief service in the ship's mess hall before their remains were stored for transport home. Marsh had stood in that service and tried to say something and could not. Novick had been funny. He did impressions of the ship's computer that made everyone laugh during long watches. Vega had been new, only 6 months out of training, and she had decorated her bunk with photographs of her family's farm back on Earth. Marsh kept seeing the photographs when she closed her eyes. The surface of Ath was worse than she had imagined. The cracks and bombardment had hit the major cities hardest, and the areas around the impact zones were gray and silent. Buildings stood half collapsed, their strain curved Valhari architecture broken into jagged shapes. The streets were covered in dust and rubble. Emergency shelters had been set up in parks and open areas, packed with civilians who had been living there for weeks with dwindling supplies. The Valhari flinched when the human soldiers arrived. Marsh noticed it immediately, the way they pulled back, the way parents moved their children behind them, the widening of their large, dark eyes. Humans were bigger than Valhari, heavier. They moved differently. Their steps carried weight, and their bodies radiated a physicality that the Valhari read as threatening. Every instinct in the Valhari evolutionary history told them that large, heavy creatures that moved with confidence were predators. Marsh's squad did what they had been trained to do. They unloaded supplies from the shuttle, food packs, clean water, thermal blankets, basic medical kits. They set up distribution points with clear signs in Velhari script that someone on the translation team had prepared. They moved slowly, kept their voices low, and made no sudden movements. It was first contact protocol, adapted for disaster relief, and it worked the way patience always works. Gradually, a Velhari man approached Marsh while she was stacking water containers. He was tall and thin, with the gray skin and large eyes common to his species, and he moved with the careful steps of someone who had not eaten properly in a long time. He spoke galactic standard in a soft voice. You are human, yes. You came from the Sol zone, yes. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the water containers and at the food packs being distributed behind her, and at the human soldiers moving through the shelter with medical supplies. His expression was complicated, too many emotions layered together for Marsh to read them all. We thought you would send medicine, he said. Maybe some food. We did not think you would come yourselves. Marsh did not know what to say to that. She handed him a water container. Instead, he took it and held it like it was something precious. Later that day, she sat with a group of Velhari children in one of the shelters. They had been separated from their families during an evacuation and were waiting to be reunited. The youngest was a small girl who would not stop trembling, her thin arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes fixed on the ground. Marsh sat down next to her and did not say anything. She just sat there close enough that the girl could feel that she was not alone, and waited. After a while, the girl leaned against Marsh's arm. She was still shaking. Marsh stayed perfectly still and let her. Ambassador Tyrell Voss requested a private meeting with Admiral Calloway aboard the Blackwater. It was granted, and Tyrell was shuttled to the carrier, the first Velhari civilian to board a human warship. He was shown to Calloway's quarters, which were surprisingly small and plain for the commander of a fleet this size. A desk, a chair, a narrow bed, a single photograph on the wall showing a woman and two children standing in front of a house with a red door. Calloway offered him water. Tyrell accepted. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. I want to thank you, Tyrell said, on behalf of the cooperative, on behalf of AFUS, what your fleet has done. We will not forget it. Calloway nodded slightly. You are welcome. I also need to ask you something, and I hope you will answer. Honestly, I will try. Tyrell said, his water down. Do you intend to stay? Calloway was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the photograph on the wall, his wife, his kids, the red door, and then he looked back at Tyrell with eyes that were tired and steady and held nothing back. Ambassador, the Kraxon Dominion controls dozens of systems. They have subjugated 15 species that we know of. The fleet we destroyed here was one arm of something much larger. If we leave now, they will regroup, they will rebuild, and they will come back, not just for you, eventually for everyone, including us. He leaned forward. We did not come all this way to leave the door open behind us. Tyrell nodded slowly. He had known the answer before he asked the question. Asking for human help had never been a temporary arrangement. It was a door that opened in one direction. The humans were part of the galactic equation now, and they would not be removed from it. He thought about Shen's warning that inviting humans was like setting fire to your house to kill the insects. Maybe Shen was right, but the Insects had been eating them alive, and the fire had come with hands that could also build. 2 weeks later, Lieutenant Marsh was back aboard the Copperhead, now part of a forward patrol group, pushing into former Craxon territory. The ship had been repaired. The whole breach on Deck 7 was sealed with fresh plating. Novik's and Vega's bunks had been cleared and reassigned to new crew members whose names Marsh was still learning. She sat in the crew quarters during a quiet watch and wrote a letter to her brother Danny back on Earth. She had been trying to write it for days, but every time she started, the words felt wrong, too small for what she had seen, too ordinary for the things she had done and the things that had been done around her. She tried to describe the Velhari children in the shelter. She tried to describe the sound of the gray Monday's guns in the debris field. She tried to describe what it felt like to watch two people you knew become names on a casualty list. None of it came out right. She settled on a single paragraph. Danny, I cannot really explain what happened out here. I thought we were going to deliver supplies. Instead, we fought the biggest battle anyone in this galaxy has ever seen, and then we handed out water bottles the next day. The aliens thought we would send bandages. We sent everything. I don't know what that makes us, but I think the galaxy is going to have to get used to it. She sent the letter and went back to her station. Stars outside the viewport were unfamiliar. New territory, unexplored, full of unknowns. Behind the Copperhead, the human fleet stretched across the darkness in formation, heading deeper into space that no friendly ship had ever entered. Ahead of them lay a war that would take years and change the galaxy forever. None of them knew how it would end, but they were going anyway. That was the human part.